I'd like to introduce the panelists for this Q&A session. Well, two I don't have to introduce because we've seen them today and we're very pleased with their performance. Alex Butler and Nick Broughton, could you please come forward? But I'm especially pleased to introduce the third panelist, who is the director of the PMCPA and has a degree in pharmacology, and is really the expert, I think, on this matter, because she has been working on the Code of Practice since 1989. Please welcome Heather Simmons. And looking at the responsibilities of our panelists and the subjects that were already discussed today, I think we're going to have an interesting conversation which will be led by a guy who's managing partner from Bluelight Partners with 28 years of experience in the industry, who loves to run half marathons, who really is a globetrotter because worked all over the world, and is a multilingual genius, I was told. Paul Dixey. And we're going to talk about the guidelines, and I'll hand you over my microphone. Okay, thank you very much.
Several languages, but it's no good without a microphone. One that works. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Following on from X Factor, and unfortunately Simon Cowell couldn't make it, so I'm here instead. We're going to keep it really tight. We've got half an hour for this panel discussion, and the topic for the panel is what effect have the introduction of the PMCPA digital guidelines have? I mean, I've been to a few Digipharm meetings and I've been to a few other digital-related meetings, and in the past few years I've constantly heard, oh, we're not sure what we're going to do, there aren't any guidelines, there aren't any rules, therefore we can't do anything. Okay? And in the last couple of years we've had the FDA hearings in November 2009, there's been a consultation, the PMCPA led with the pharmaceutical industry in the UK, and then lo and behold, on the 1st of April 2011, no April Fool there, the PMCPA issued their digital guidelines. And as far as I'm aware, and please correct me if there's people from other countries in Europe here, and in fact from Australia as well, I'm not aware of any other regulatory body or anybody else that advises the industry of any other guidelines which have come out about digital marketing or digital communications for the pharmaceutical industry. Is anybody else? Sweden? Excellent. Okay, good. Perhaps we'll come back to you and ask what difference they've made in Sweden. When did they come out in Sweden?
I don't know, I'm not Swedish.
Det är inte så bra. Okay. Well, okay. So I'm going to pass the question first to Heather. Okay, you came out with these guidelines, came out in April 2011. What effect do you think they've had from your perspective?
Well, I seem to get a lot less phone calls. Or the ones that I do get start along the lines, do you know about the guidance we've issued? Yes. Have you read it? Not quite. But no, I jest. I think it was... The reason we did them as we did was there was a lot of people who were trying to engage digitally with the pharmaceutical industry who weren't necessarily as familiar with the regulatory framework. So we thought it would be helpful to at least set that out so that people understood where all the rules and regulations, etc., were coming from. As is often the case at the PMCPA, we issue guidance and fairly shortly thereafter we get a complaint that has some relevance, and certainly we've had one since we've issued the guidance. I think from our point of view it has helped, and you know, clearly there were a lot of questions, and it's not a document that we consider sort of done and dusted, so if there are questions that you feel we should add to it, please let us know. We're not getting huge numbers of questions in this area at the moment, but certainly, you know, it's set in stone and it can be updated. The MHRA was very supportive of the document and very keen to be involved in developing it and referring questions, etc., to us. So it has been welcomed by the regulator. We've had quite a few comments from other groups, and in fact I had a call from Ireland only yesterday. They're telling me how good they thought it was and how much it had helped them. But clearly, you know, we don't know what we don't know, so if you've got comments, you can either catch me, tell me now in public, or email me and we'll try and update them.
So Nick, from your perspective, you work with a number of pharmaceutical companies. What effect have you seen since the 1st of April 2011?
It's difficult, I think, to talk for other people and how much difference it's made to other groups. It hasn't made a huge difference to my life, to be honest. Well, not generally, but wouldn't expect it to. But it hasn't made a huge difference to how I'm dealing with questions again about digital issues. I think part of that is that maybe to Heather's point, it probably wasn't targeted at people like me. A lot of what was in there, I think I would have thought of intuitively anyway, from the guidance that's already in the code and the principles, etc. There's one or two areas, as I highlighted earlier, where I may disagree with it, but I'd only act against it, not against it, but act contradicting it if I had very, very good reason to do so. And I think the other thing about it is that actually a lot of the questions I get in the digital arena aren't covered by that guidance, in truth. And that's, I think, to the point raised by Alex in some of his blogs, and also myself in the presentation, that actually there are so many different situations that we can get ourselves into communicating in social media. It can't cover everything. I mean, I think it was useful, but it hasn't made a huge difference to my life personally. So,
in summary, then, the companies that you work with and what you do, you haven't really done anything different then?
No, not as I say, not within the roles that I've done. I haven't done anything differently. It hasn't changed any activity that I wouldn't, or advice that I've given that I wouldn't otherwise have given.
Okay, then Alex, from your perspective, and Janssen, who people seen today, have been very active in the digital space and for quite some time. What effect did the introduction of these guidelines have upon the way that you approach your marketing and your communications within Janssen?
Well, I mean, obviously, J&J and Janssen is a big company, so even though I cover a lot of the EMEA region, I'm not obviously involved in everything, so I can only talk personally from the things I have been involved in. It hasn't changed anything, but that isn't meant to be critical of the PMCPA guidance. It's just that what came to me during Nick's presentation is that there's discussions we had and around the things that we did, which involved the regulatory and compliance teams, which obviously involved medical. Those discussions and decisions had already been made, and they were based around whether we think we're doing the right thing. So when the PMCPA guidance came out, we did have a meeting, for instance, to look at the psoriasis project, and it was decided that when we looked at how many people we thought we might be helping, and when we looked at the process that I'd written, what was in place for how to manage the campaign, or whatever you want to call it, we decided that we were doing the right thing, and we would be happy to defend ourselves on that. So I think, really, I agree with Nick in the sense that the last thing I think we need is very specific technical guidance for digital, certainly for communication, because we know what the principles of the ABPI are. If you can go on the Today programme, or you can answer questions from someone from the Daily Mail about what you're doing, if you know that you are trying to help people, that you're not trying to promote your medicines, that you're not trying to come in between patients and prescriber, that you're not trying to sabotage that relationship, and that you have the right things in place to collect adverse events and to help manage the safety of your products, then I think there's nothing you can't do with those principles. So I think what Heather said is important in that we need to think of this as something we can form. We can iteratively improve, and there's certain questions that I have around the guidance, but I think, like everything in guidance, it's about how things are written and what that could mean. But the truth is, and this has come up time and again, and I think it came up from in the hall as well, is that at the end of the day, this is subjective. A group of people have to make a decision whether they think they're doing the right thing and they think that it's within the code, and then at the end of the day, other people have to decide if that's right or not. And so for me, I'd suggest that it's about personal responsibility as well, and collective responsibility as a company. And if people then challenge that, what you've done, then you will have, other people then will decide whether what you've done is right or not.
So to summarise, really, you're still abiding, if you like, by the underlying principles, and the specifics, probably that you don't want to see too specific, as was commented earlier, that things change so quickly you'll never be able to keep up. So let's work with the underlying underlying principles, which you mentioned and Nick mentioned as well. And Heather, you touched upon, as you mentioned in passing, that there has been one case since those guidelines came out. Would you like to just briefly describe it and then say, well, actually, was the interpretation of that, what I want to get to, is the interpretation of that particular case different after the guidelines than it would have perhaps been beforehand?
No.
Okay.
She says in a nervous fashion. You can see full details of the case on our website, and I apologise to anybody from Bayer here, but it was a Bayer case involving some tweets sent about the launch of some medicines which were ruled to be advertising prescription-only medicines to the general public, which is a requirement that's been in the code for, well, I think since it started, actually, 1958. And clearly, you can't base a ruling on what's in the guidance. You couldn't rule somebody in breach of the code because they're not in line with the guidance, because the guidance can't cover every single situation. It sets out the principles and the things you need to think about. You can only rule people in breach of the code of what's in the actual code. And I know there was a strong feeling from some people that we should actually amend the code to put things in there about social media, etc. And my own view was that this wasn't the right thing to do at this particular time because we had very limited experience. I mean, it's a fast-changing area. It's always going to be a fast-changing area. But it is about building up experience and formulating what we want to put in the code that meets the requirements of the regulatory framework, but also gives companies support and advice as well. So clearly, this is the very similar approach we took when they invented that newfangled thing called the internet. It was going back a few years now, but we had guidance, and then eventually something was incorporated into the code. I think the other element that means that we're cautious as well is this discussion is still ongoing about the Information to Patients Directive in the European Parliament. The parliamentarians looked at it and made 400 changes. It's now in the Commission, and we're expecting something to come out in the autumn, whenever that may be. It's supposed to be this year, but who knows? So I think there's still some regulatory framework to be established, and until that has come out, I think, unless there are good reasons otherwise, that we might just carry on as we are at the moment, as we've had a case and we've managed to deal with it under the current code.
Okay. So again, coming back to the underlying principles, would have been the case had there not been those digital guidelines, or when they did come out, it still would have been in breach.
Yes, but I think, people in companies want to be reassured about what are the approaches or what are the things they need to think about. And, clearly it is more difficult for perhaps some functions within companies than others, or people who are starting out or new to the area. So, I'm quite reassured that Nick didn't find them very useful or helpful, because I would like to think, given his esteemed position, he should know all about them, the principles and such like. But other people starting out, and, somebody talked earlier about how the medics keep changing their mind. I know I'm paraphrasing it slightly. You change your medic and you get a different opinion. It's a bit like, ask a lawyer and you'll get two opinions or whatever. But it is about trying to get everybody onto a similar level within the pharmaceutical world, and then developing on from there.
Okay, thanks. So let me just open it up to the audience. And there's several companies who've been coming to Digipharm or other meetings for quite some time. Who amongst you, since the 1st of April 2011, have done something online that you wouldn't have done had those digital guidelines not been published? So you've not done anything since the 1st of April? Sorry? Carried on. Okay. Carried on differently or the same way? Okay. Who has done something, has stopped doing something since those guidelines came out on the 1st of April 2011? Okay, stopped asking for guidelines. Okay, then. So let me put it to the audience. Why were you asking, or why were so many people asking for the guidelines, and then actually haven't done anything differently since they came out? Okay, so hand raised there. If you have the microphone down the front, please.
I can shout really loud. It's not going to be that good. Thank you. At the thought of being a bit provocative,
Good. Excellent.
well, do you think we were perhaps expecting a little bit more?
Okay, let me...
And that's no disrespect to the guidelines that have been published, because I think to put things into perspective has been great. But the feeling I get, certainly from this afternoon sessions, is that we're still in a very much a grey area. So maybe a bit more clarification for us would have been good.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's ask somebody working in pharma then. Were you expecting more? Would you have wanted more?
No, but I didn't want anything.
Okay.
But I completely understand the position that I know that they got so many inquiries from people that wanted this. There was every conference I went to, it was almost taken over by people talking about regulation. People have forgotten about the FDA now. But, you know, it was usually the FDA. First of all, the FDA were ahead because they'd done, you know, they were going to bring out guidance, then they don't. And then it was, why don't we have guidance? Personally, for me, I think that the principles are there already, and if anything, it could confuse people. So, for instance, the Bayer thing, obviously I'm not going to talk about that particular case, but the truth is that Twitter is a means of curating information, mostly for brands, for companies, or for information hubs like media outlets. And that curation of information is based on intended recipient. And what I mean by that is that if you, for instance, had said if you're a member of the medical media and would like information on around, so I don't know, making it up, diabetes, then from my perspective, my personal one, not the company's, but my personal perspective, you could then go to that if the intended audience was made clear and that you linked to it. So you would not be promoting a medicine. Obviously, if you put claims about a drug and then link to a press release, you are then turning that press release into a promotional piece of material. So I think the thing is, it's complicated. It's about, on the internet, it's about context. And it's very hard to encapsulate that into a piece of regulation, because at the end of the day, like Nick made very clear in the presentation, which I thought was right, you have to know what the principles are and do what you think is right from your company's perspective for the patients and the people that you're trying to help. And what I tried to say in my presentation, which maybe didn't come over, is that if you agree from the beginning what it is that you're trying to do as a business, the charter that I was speaking about was not a charter as that we will do this on this platform. The whole point was, if we say we want to support the public, we want to support patients within the therapy areas we work in, and more broadly than that within healthcare, it is not possible to do that now without being on the internet, and being on the internet means you have to be social. So for me, the point is that once you agree that, the question then is how you do that ethically and within the principles of the Code of Practice in the UK. And so for me, I know it's not straightforward, but for me, in a sense, the discussions there can be developed on top of that for specific cases. I don't know whether Nick's got anything to add.
Well, I'd just put another slightly different perspective on it, because I ended by saying that I think that ethically competent companies deserve to succeed. And I think it's not fair if we give rules out and give too many rules out. It restricts, actually, the people that are good at thinking about it. And I think, and makes a level playing field out of a playing field that shouldn't be level. Companies that can work it out should get ahead for being able to work it out. And companies that need rules and can't think about it deserve to fail. I go back to that point. You know, why should we have so many, add a lot of ethical rules any more than we should add rules about how you promote your medicines or how you sell your medicines? That's part of the competition. And I think it's good, actually, that we're in an area where good ethics will be rewarded by good performance.
Just pass on to you, Heather, if I've understood correctly the question is sort of the guidelines, perhaps they weren't specific enough. I mean, what was the intent? Was it to be specific, Heather?
I don't know. I'd be very happy to receive any suggestions for additions to the guidelines, if there are any. You might be writing them now, I'm not sure.
Anybody want to put their hands up? Who's looking for something specifically in the guidelines which aren't there now? What specific area do you want covered? Nothing at all? So they're fine then? God, there must be something. Somebody must have a question. Yeah, Jean.
I'll just suggest something to open the debate about it, which is in my presentation I was focusing very much on thinking about when you end a campaign with a programme. And one of the things that I think would be useful guidance on is We all know that with service to medicine, if you're, for example, supplying nurses to a practice, you've got to think about what happens at the end of that 1 year's provision of nursing funding or whatever. When it's something like providing free apps that a doctor might use in real life in the hospital to use the weight and BMI or something to decide how much anaesthetic this patient's going to get. If you provide a free app as a service to medicine or as a gift in that way, is there some responsibility that you need to be guided to in these guidelines about taking that away or keeping it updated? Or saying it's only for a finite time and then it's not a free service to medicine. It can't be a service medicine for 15 years. So some of that sort of guidance about thinking through, not just setting it up, but how you come out of something would be valuable to me.
Want to comment on that, Heather?
Well, clearly that would apply to many things under the Code of Practice, not just digitally, things that are provided as medical or educational goods or services. And, you know, clearly there's nothing in the code that says you must consider what to do at the end. There is a little bit of guidance in some of the supplementary information about preparing people for if you withdraw the service, because if they're expecting you to provide a service, they need to plan for when it's withdrawn. But I think, you know I often get criticised for this answer, it depends. I might have it on my gravestone if I were going to have one. But in a way, it does depend on what the app is, because the app might become out of date. So the code requires you to keep it up to date anyway, and that's covered in the generality of the guidance. But certainly something like that, perhaps we should try and draw out a little bit about how you need to consider how to finish things or to make sure things are kept up to date, because it's no good saying it was up to date when it was issued. It has to be up to date when it's used.
I think, sorry, I should have made it clear. I think in the sense that what you do when someone takes an app, you've got to keep track of who has downloaded your app and who's using it to be able to tell them that it's out of date and withdrawn it. And it's the lack of control, potentially, when something's out there. Maybe extra care should be taken in that scenario.
Well, I'm a sort of, you know, dinosaur on the digital media front. But surely when you're designing these apps, some of it there has to be some sort of date on it and some sort of warning, or, you know, there must be some sort of statement about, you know, this was okay at the particular time, or some of those things may or may not be relevant. I mean, again, it comes back to what the app is. But certainly, you know, we can add a question into the guidance about it. This needs to be considered, and certainly try and start to think about what the answers are.
Alex wanted to make a comment there. Yep.
Well, it kind of changed halfway through. I mean, on the specific point about apps, I mean, the biggest problem that we have is making people interested and use the applications. The degradation of apps is massive. People download things, and I think 94% get rid of them or don't use them again after 2 weeks. You can sign up to a push notification, so you can easily tell people if they accept that the app should be updated, or you can go back and update the app. So I don't see a problem with that. But if you look at that in the physical world, once you've handed out a piece of literature to a doctor or a tool to a doctor, you don't have to make a commitment to trawl surgeries or all consulting rooms, you know, after 2 years to make sure that it doesn't exist anymore. So, and it will have legal notification on it when it was produced and who it's produced for and what it's intended for, and the privacy policy and a link to the company in order for any questions to be asked. So I don't see that so much as an issue from my personal perspective. But I think the question started in a different place, which is where I've, if I remember rightly, I think I've forgotten where it was now, but if you can remind me, Paul, what was the original point? Because it wasn't specific to applications, was it? It was. I remember. It was actually how you end projects, and I think this is really important actually, because myself, I like to. I mean, it might not be. I don't know whether it's the right phrase now, but it's the phrase I use internally, which is to have a living will for every project that you have, and that needs to be. In a sense, you can't work that out completely from the beginning because you don't know how things are going to go. The biggest issue when you launch a social media campaign, or actually it's a commitment and not a campaign, the biggest issue is not how you will end it when there's hundreds of thousands of people that are interested in taking in your community or your tools. It's a case of no one's interested in you. You know, you hope that you will be successful. If you are, then hopefully that commitment that you've taken will mean that it will go beyond say the normal campaign mentality, but to produce a living will, to understand how you will end it, who you could possibly hand it on to, how you would pull out if you wanted to, how you would inform the people that had taken part, how you might migrate that to something else. you can't nail everything down at the beginning, but you need to have in place as part of the strategy a way that you would remove yourself from that if you had to. And the nuclear button for us, I suppose, and Facebook is that if we need to, at any one time, we could, I suppose, remove the page, which is there for a period of time. So, I mean, that should be part of it.
I suppose many people embark in, and we've heard about the challenges of whether it's a change of medic or whatever, or compliance or legal across several countries, is having gone through all the work of managing to put something out there, to actually say, well, actually, I'm also going to work out what it is in my plan that's going to be to take it back down again, could be quite challenging. Nick, do you want to comment on the lifespan and how you manage that?
No, I agree with everything that's been said there. You need to think about the end with the patients and the people or whoever you're targeting in mind, and what they're thinking when things disappear. I just wanted to pick up on something that Heather said, this issue of it depends, because it's an irritation for me when I hear people criticising the PMCPA for giving that it depends advice. I think I've already explained fairly clearly. It depends as to whether something's ethical, what your intention is and what your justification is for doing it. And the PMCPA in a conversation can't possibly know everything that's gone on behind the scenes in your company about your intentions and what you're seeking to do. So to some extent, it will always depend when you ring up in those grey areas. So I just thought I'd do that in defence of Heather.
I can see Eric getting closer here, so I'm just going to put it out. We've got three minutes, and just the PMCPA, I think, is going through a consultation now. The ABPI is about what the next code should look like. I mean, people are going to be communicating with you, but is there anything now out in the audience? Anybody wants to put their hand up and say, I'd like to see this in there? Okay, here's your chance, with Heather on the stage there, to put your hand up and say, what I'd next like to see in the next iteration of the ABPI code, or perhaps in the FPI code, because you work with those guys as well, is this. Anything in particular? So we've got a hand raised there. Pippa?
I completely agree with your statement that you can't legislate for every single circumstance. And I do think it might be just quite helpful at the beginning to have a series of questions for people to ask themselves before they perhaps ring you, starting off with, what is your intention with this particular thing? And that could apply to almost any part of the code, because I think if you have the right series of questions for people to work through, they can usually work the answer out themselves, actually, rather than trying to legislate for every single circumstance.
Yeah, I think, but we do get a few questions along the lines of, well, have you read clause 22? No, I haven't got time, that's why I'm ringing you. So, yeah. I mean, that's one end of the spectrum. But certainly, I mean, people who contact us regularly know that what we do is just challenge people to say, well, if your competitor were doing this, what would you think? And sometimes that can change the whole tone of a conversation. Particularly, some bold marketing people will be saying, well, I think it's fine. And you think, well, why are you ringing me? And then you say, well, if your competitor were doing it, how would you feel? And they say, well, it's terrible. It's clearly a breach of clause 7.2 without being able to stop themselves. So I think we could do a bit more about sort of those sorts of strategies. Certainly, that's very helpful. Okay. Thank you.
They've got one minute. I think there's a question at the back there. Yeah, please.
Pharma companies spend a lot of money on, building these websites. And sometimes they want a one-stop shop, so there's got a lot of information on it. Some guidance around can we have promotional material alongside services and Meg's information on the same website, and if it can happen, how we could do it, because as a medic I get to review a lot of this stuff, and at the moment I'm pushing back on it, but I think looking at the ROI and looking at the way that information is being looked at out there, all of that information on one website would make sense for the physician. So some guidance around that, because it is a very touchy area.
Okay.
Yes, just really about it comes down to sometimes about site architecture, because of course a medical or educational good or service can't be linked to the promotion of a particular medicine. And so, of course, if you have it on your promotional page, then it becomes a promotional activity and would be a breach of the code. But certainly, the whole of the NHS is changing, and we need to ensure that, the code keeps up to date. But as well, we still have to reflect UK legal requirements, and it's a very broad definition of promotion that we work with, as you all know.
We still have one short question,
yep.
and then we.
Sam?
Just looking at the Twitter feed, one of the comments that's coming through at the moment is obviously a lot of the people in the room are work in the international or European market. So if there's any sort of summing up thoughts for those people.
I mean, Heather, you work, and I think Nick, you work as well with companies that go across borders, and Heather, you've had conversations with the FPIA and so on. Do you see this, any guidance for people working, whether it be in France or Germany, or people out of Sweden or Switzerland working across countries?
Well, I think clearly some of the other European countries are looking at it. They have a slightly different situation, I guess, because if something's in French, you tend to think it might need to comply with the French rules, whereas if something's in English, there could be a lot of different rules that might be relevant. And the US is looking at it. I know the FDA hasn't come out with any guidance yet, but I know the US Trade Association people have made a few comments that actually the FDA are sending out tweets that pharmaceutical companies would be perhaps chased by the FDA if they were to be sending them out. So I think it's all pretty difficult. And it's still about going on a national basis rather than coming up with anything that would apply internationally and on the European way, I'm afraid.
Okay, one final comment, Nick?
Well, no, I think this is an area that needs some attention, but I don't know how it's going to happen because it's out of the hands of people in this room. It's a political issue, really. We do need some uniformity of the application of laws and rules across Europe. You know, I've just come back from an international congress in another country, and some of the activity there clearly wouldn't be allowed in the UK and wouldn't be allowed in certain other markets. But then there are issues of if you're going to chase that company down, how do you do it? Which code do you go to? Do you have to go legally, which is a sort of a barrier for some companies? So, I mean, personally, I would like to see the FBA code have more teeth, frankly. If we're really signing up to it as a European industry, then let's give it some teeth.
Okay. I have to draw it to a close there. Thank you very much, Heather, Nick, Alex. Thank you very much for your comments from the floor. And if anybody had us think of anything in the next iteration of the code, or please contact Heather. I'm sure she'd love to have your suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the panel.